Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Last Place podcast, a podcast where we don't so much care about winning games, we just really enjoy playing them and
talking about them.
That's a segue that went as smooth as possible. My name is Efka and I come from a little board game YouTube channel called No Pun Included, and my co-host is, as always,
John Cox from John Gets Games, also a little board game channel where I also talk about board games just as much as you do, and we don't talk about them enough, so let's chat about them here. But you got to do like a special board gaming thing. You went on like a board gaming pilgrimage last week, didn't you?
I know, yeah. I went to a place called Gozo, which is an island in Malta, above Malta. But it's not Malta, because Malta is an island of itself. But there's also the country Malta that has Gozo as an island. And a little person called Richard Ham lives there, or also known as Rado, and we went to see him and spend a few days playing games and recording videos with him, which have not gone up yet anywhere, but will. There's a video that will feature Richard on our channel, and there are also a couple of videos that will feature us on his channel, and one of those will be up very shortly, I believe, on his channel, so you can go to Richard's thing. And I mean, if you don't know Rado, just Google Rado Runs Through and you will find him.
I saw the photos he posted. That looks like a really beautiful island.
So yeah, it's completely empty because Gozo and Malta in general apparently relies largely as its economic source of income on tourists. And in that kind of weather, there weren't that many tourists. Pretty much any house you went by, out of about 20 apartments, one had people in it, and the rest was just empty, and the streets were empty, and we arrived there in the middle of like a massive thunderstorm, and the waves were crashing, and no one was there. It was great. It was like the entire place was ours, and we got to play lots of games, and it was just a lot of fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And speaking of things that are a lot of fun and also don't have very many people on them, we played Terraforming Mars yesterday.
We did.
We actually played it online. Anyone who's paid attention to my channel knows I put a review up a couple weeks ago. I think this was like my 6th or 7th play of it now, but it was your first, right?
Yeah, I resisted playing Terraforming Mars for a very long time because I did not think I would enjoy it. So the question, I guess, then is, did I enjoy it? And the answer is begrudgingly yes. But
the same thing happened to me.
but I do have a caveat, right? So one of my friends from a local club was playing Vinhos Deluxe, and he finished his game, and I went up to him and said, "Hey, how did you find that?" And he said, "Well, I didn't so much play a game. I just felt like I had an experience." And I feel like that's how I felt about Terraforming Mars, because all the things that I feared about it came true. It's just that regardless of that, it's still kind of like a fun game, and I didn't much mind playing it. It just felt like mechanically it left me wanting, and I kind of thought about Terraforming Mars to myself as I went to sleep on my own in the lonesome darkness, and I just wouldn't leave my head, and I thought, look, okay, I really liked playing the game, but I didn't feel like it was very solid mechanically. But what does that mean? You know, like, we're called Last Place. We're on a podcast that constantly talks about, it doesn't matter whether, you know, you win or lose or whatever. It matters whether you had a good time, and I suppose I did. I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's just kind of the thought process.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that you glossed over is that not everybody knows how this game plays.
No, that's very true.
And so real briefly, this is just a straight up engine builder game. Your Mars is there. It's not terraformed at the beginning of the game. When the game is over, it's going to be fully terraformed, and it's just a question of how much help did you do, and you get points for that, and you get points for everything. It's got this deck of like 200 cards that are all unique, and on your turn you pretty much just play the cards that you have in your hand, and they will increase your incomes on 6 different resource tracks, and you spend these resources to play new cards and activate big cards and terraform the planet in some pretty cool ways, but that's pretty much what you're doing here. Is just you start with pretty much nothing, and that's what we did. There's a variant where you could start at 0 on all of your income tracks and put a bunch of extra cards in, and we played it that way, 2 players of course, and yeah, we began with 0 engines and ended with gigantic ones, and I thought I was going to do pretty well. I was relatively confident I was going to win, although not not solidly, and I ended up losing. I by like nine or so points. And I played this game a bunch, and you haven't. So, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I lost, right? Last place.
You say that we terraform Mars in cool ways, but we actually terraform Mars in warm ways, because the three actual ways you terraform Mars in this game is adding oxygen temperature, because there was no temperature before, and also oceans, water. And I guess the entire theme feels like very much an abstraction, because you kind of imagine in your head, like, okay, I'm this corporation and I'm going to bring all these bulldozers and, you know, do all the things. And actually what ends up happening is you play a card that says beavers, and look, now you have beavers. Mars has beavers, deal with it. If you don't like it, you can go live on another planet. Unfortunately, the only other planet is Earth, and that also has beavers. So there's nowhere to go, really.
Yeah.
But I think what kind of bothered me about terraforming Mars, and so, okay, everyone who's familiar with the game, at least seen pictures online, knows just how bad the artwork in the game is. It's not so much that it's bad, it's just all over the place. You've got...
it's very inconsistent.
Yeah, clip art and drawings and stills and stock footage of...
CGI from the mid-90s.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. And I guess the one redeeming thing about the artwork is that you can, at least when you sit down with your friends and play this game, you can all have a laugh about how bad the artwork is. And it's kind of a topic of conversation, I guess. But that whole feeling of how the artwork is just cobbled together, unfortunately for me, pervades towards the mechanisms as well, because it feels like a lot of the elements of the game were just slapped together and they kind of went, yeah, it works. And so one of the things that I was really not looking forward to is the 10% take that cards. And I thought, well, okay, why does an engine builder need take that cards? And apparently the designer came out and said, well, you need them to kind of keep people in check. And I can understand that. My two problems with that are that A, well, why couldn't you have designed a game that was more balanced and you didn't need to keep people in check? That's number one. Number two is that they didn't really feel very interesting, you know? At least take that feels strategic and is utilized in different ways, like, for example, in Not Alone or Inish, is exciting to play. In Terraforming Mars, you just kind of do it. You do it begrudgingly because you're just hurting some other person. And it doesn't really feel like you get a lot of advantage from it. I mean, all the take that cards give you something as well. But what you get never feels very strong and very desirable. It's more about, okay, I'm going to focus on that one person and hurt them now so they don't, like, overshoot in points. And thematically also, there's this sort of element that all the take that cards, you know, you play a corporation in Terraforming Mars and you're like competing with other corporations and you're trying to like be the better corporation. So you think, oh, okay, so I'm gonna send like spies and sabotage their power plant or whatever. No, what you do is you buy a meteor. I don't know how, but you spend money, you get a meteor, and the meteor crashes down with whatever the other person is building and just blows everything up.
Yeah, in general, the take that eats plants. Like, plants are one of the 6 resources that you have, and that's the biggest thing that gets removed from players. And some of the cards give you stuff, but other ones, like you play that virus card on me, and I just lost 5 plants. You didn't gain anything from that. You just had to spend money for me to lose plants, and it probably cost me 1 or 2 points at the end of the game. And I think it cost you like 7 or so money. So to a certain degree, in a 2-player setting, you could say that you spent like 7 or so in-game dollars to get a victory point on me. But I agree, and I think I mentioned this in my review that I didn't think the take that cards were that big of a deal, and I thought they were kind of over complained about because I never really saw them play that much. And I think you have a good point about it. Like, maybe that's because they're not that interesting. Like, in general, the cool cards are not that take that-esque, and occasionally, you know, you could crash the moon Deimos onto the planet and you're going to wipe out a bunch of plants from an opponent and do a bunch of other cool stuff. So occasionally you have like some frilly take that on the sides of a cooler action, but some of them just deny stuff from other opponents. And I don't know, I think that they're harshness has been overblown, but I also agree that they're not that actually interesting to do as you're actually playing the game.
Other things are interesting about it, though. So I liked the card combos I was building, but because there is, and I know that's a criticism that's also been thrown around, there's such a large variety of cards, you just never know what you're going to draw, and sometimes you can get away with that because some things you can do as basic actions that are overcosted, so you don't need cards to do them, you can just pay a lot of money and do the thing. And I don't know, I still felt like a lot of the times I was building up towards this cool thing that, everything will come together. And it just never did. It was mostly making strategic decisions as the game went along and playing tactical play. And as an engine building game, I have to say, I've enjoyed games like 51st State, the new Master Set, for example, a lot more because they're more purely focused on the engine building elements rather than the tactical gameplay of I'm going to get that now and then that now and then I'm going to take this, just so you're denying things to your opponent. Even Race for the Galaxy, I think, with its masses and masses of cards, somehow manages to get away and do it better.
It's interesting that you mentioned 51st State because I think it was after my second play, I was talking to somebody and I said that in my opinion, Terraforming Mars kind of replaces 51st State for myself. I use that as an actual example because it's similar, right? In that the game is all about drawing cards from a deck. It's all about engine building and doing the best you can with the cards that you get. But there are duplicates in the big deck of 51st State, so I guess there's a little bit less variance there and a little bit more less possibility of just not drawing something that you necessarily need. But I feel like the stuff you do in Terraforming Mars is so much cooler than 51st State. And I like 51st State. I gave it a positive review. I'll definitely play it again. And it's a shorter experience than Terraforming Mars, so it definitely has a plus on that side. But I think from an engine building, from a card drawing, tactical, figuring out what you're going to play from your hand to make combos type of game, I think that the combos are just cooler in Terraforming Mars. In 51st State, it seems like it's usually just like what combination of guns and fuel squeezes out another point here or there. Whereas in Terraforming Mars, you're like building an energy infrastructure and then building cards that actually consume that energy to turn it into, oceans or just, straight up victory points or various other things. I guess I just complained about the victory points in Terraforming in 51st State, but it seems like in general, many of the things that you do in Terraforming Mars, something cool in the game and give you points. Whereas 51st State it really feels like it's got a clear hood on the engine, and you just look in, you're like, yep, it's a stuff to victory point conversion engine right there. So it's not a knock on 51st State at all, but I do see the similarities between the two games, and I think I'm on the other side where I think I enjoy the engine building in Terraforming Mars more.
Yeah, I just want a little bit more streamlining, but I'm wondering whether partly you feel like that because the theming on the cards of Terraforming Mars feels a lot more, well, thematic, for lack of a better word. Everything just kind of makes sense. Oh, there's like 8% oxygen on the planet. Great, we can have squirrels and flesh-eating bacteria now. Yeah. And then those cards that you play that do have flesh-eating bacteria, they kind of make sense in terms of what you do. So it all kind of comes together, even though it feels very abstract, and if you think too long about it, you're like, wait a minute, no, this doesn't make any sense. But never mind. When you do play the game, it's engaging in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there are several times that I remember you drew a card and you were like, what? Like reading farther down the card, you're like, I can't believe this card exists. You said that a couple times. So like, there's some pretty impactful things in there. And so I guess at the end of the day, would you play it again?
I would play it again, but I am glad that I didn't go out of my way to buy it because I don't think I'll ever own a copy. But if I'm at a sort of a convention setting and someone says, hey, do you want to play Terraforming Mars? I will, because even though it's long-ish, it's never so brain-burning that you feel very taxed playing it. So it's a fairly kind of chill experience.
On that note, let's shift over to another game about planets in space, but this time they're even more abstracted, and that is a game called Solarius Mission.
Because you have ships there's ships in the game, so we're shipping over to it. Is that what you did?
Yes, exactly. We took the transport shuttles over to Solarius Mission, and so this I played this one twice, and it's the latest one from Spielworks, and it's been listed as a 3X style game. So in general, the 4 X's are exploit, expand, explore, and exterminate. And this game,
You got them right.
I got it right. Even though, once again, my ongoing crusade for the 5X experience, this game also has experimentation. But either way, this one does not have extermination, which is a big reason I was interested in giving this one a shot. It's from the designer duo that made La Granja, which I've not played, but looked cool, and I heard lots of good things about it, so I was excited to try this one out. And I got it a few months ago, and I'm just going to get this out of the way right at the very beginning. We don't have to talk about this much, but there's some weird stuff going on with the components in this game.
Yeah, I know, because I also have a copy. I haven't played it yet, but when I went to Spiel to pick it up, immediately the man handed me an envelope full of bits and said, "You'll need these because we misprinted them and they're smaller than they need to be." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'm sure it's fine. How small can they be?" Very
amazingly small.
Very, very small.
Yeah, so the game comes with all these discs for the players, and they're literally so small that the static electricity clings them to the inside of the Ziploc bags. So anyway, that's a mistake, and mistakes happen. I get it. I emailed the publisher, and he actually sent me back the appropriate size discs. It took a month or two, but it's a small operation. The other thing, though, is that there is an arts and crafts project in here. Like, you literally, the instructions tell you need to use glue to glue a couple things together to make a spinner. Not spinner, I guess, but it spins around like a little arrow on a dial, like a clock. And I just kind of blew my mind. I'm like, hasn't Fantasy Flight had dials forever?
I know, those things that you clip together, right? And then you have a dial.
You shouldn't need to use glue. But either way, we did it. We got out some glue. I think it was Elmer's glue, and we glued this thing together, and we've now played it a couple times. And let's talk about the actual game here.
Okay, can we actually come back? Because I really want to tell people how painful it was for me to glue components.
Okay.
I didn't expect to glue components, and I just sat there and looked at it for like 2 days going, I know I have to glue this, but and I don't know what it is about. It is pathetic in a way, but I couldn't bring myself to put glue on like board game components. And then I did eventually, and of course it was fine. But now it's in a box, and I'm worried that another component is gonna go like flying and knock it over, and I'll have to re-glue it or
It's pretty solid, and honestly, you don't need the glue. You can kind of like pivot on a finger around a dial. But anyway, so let's actually talk about that dial when it comes to the gameplay, because this really is the central mechanism to the game. On your turn, you will be rolling a die at the end of your turn, realistically, and putting it onto this little dial. And at the beginning of the next person's turn, you just pick one of the dice that is on this dial, and you evaluate an action based on the color of the die and the number of pips on it. And these are special dice. They have not 1 through 6 pips on it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it goes like 1, 2, 3, and there's some stars on there that can be modified by the engine that you're building in front of you. And this creates a really cool decision space, because where you pull the die from is going to either have a penalty or a bonus, because at the end of every turn, after you roll the die, you move this little, I guess you could say, hour hand around the clock, and when you do that, it changes the value of the bonus for every die previous. So essentially what it means is the longer it goes with a certain die not being picked, the more incentivized it gets for you to pick it, because it just gets more bonus stuff on it. And I love incentivization mechanisms in games. I think that's probably, if someone had to ask me what my favorite mechanism in any board game is, it's incentivization structures, where you have things like in Puerto Rico, where you have all the actions, and the ones that don't get picked, you put the coins on them so that they're more valuable on the next turn, and at some point, someone's going to take that crappy action. Firenze is another one where there are some legitimately terrible options out there, but the longer the game goes, the more incentivized those things get, to the point where someone says, you know what, it's worth it for me to take that spot, and this game has it as well. So right from the get-go, I'm excited and interested in this, because I think it's just one of the most elegant ways to balance the decisions that you have when you're playing the game.
So that's a thing that's also in Ora Labora, I believe, which is still to date, after I played almost all of them, my favorite Uwe Rosenberg game. And I know exactly what you mean, because every time something gets picked that's very expensive, you're always thinking, this is great, because now I can have the thing that I wanted, and it's going to be cheap, and it also will come with a lot of bonuses. So Or you're in a situation where you can't get what you want, so you have to make that decision whether you want to invest and pick something that's not quite as good, but it is the thing that you need. And I know it's not a favorite thing for everyone, because a lot of people feel punished when they play games with similar mechanisms, but I like it. I have to say I like it.
Well, it's good that you like that mechanic, because it is in here, although not in necessarily an overpowering way. It's just a nice little frilly thing associated with these actions that you're pulling. And so what you're actually doing with these dice when you grab them is you will get to do the various other X-style things that you can do in this style of game. One of them is you can increase your carrying capacity for different resources, and that is a big part of this game, is resource management. You are going to be getting these different colored resources, and you will be spending these resources to build kind of an empire infrastructure with things like outposts, as well as fulfilling missions that are going to give you points. And it's very important to try and juggle the amount of resources that you have, and there's several different ways to get it.
I heard that there's like pickup delivery element in this game, so would you be like taking these resources and moving them like from one outpost to another outpost? What's happening
No,
here?
you generate these resources, you put them on your player mat, and then you consume them later. You are running around this large map with a single ship, trying to explore planets and that kind of stuff, but you never really need to take something from one location over to another.
Okay, so would you say that the majority of the game is really focusing on your own player area and upgrading the things that you can do and making those things be better effectively, or you be better at doing them?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely about improving your area in front of you, and there's not actually a lot of player interaction in this game. The biggest way is taking a die from the dial that somebody else might really want, and you aren't allowed to actually stop your movement on a spot on the board that already has an opponent's wooden piece down. And near the end of the game, that can occasionally be a problem, and certain things can get kind of filled up. But yeah, it really is kind of like your personal experience of just kind of running around and trying to explore planets. And there is actually some randomness there. When you flip over a planet, you get to see what kind of reward there is on the other side based off of a condition. You can either try to expand into that planet by taking it, and then you need to satisfy the condition on it. And you have some idea, because if it's a yellow planet, you know you're going to need to spend some amount of money in order to actually expand onto that planet.
Is that because yellow is tied to money?
Yes, yeah, and the overall art aesthetic of the game it's nice. It's a little bit bland, but it's also mechanically very smart, because yeah, pretty much everything that is yellow has something to do with making yellow stuff. So if you have a yellow die, then you can use that yellow die to make money. And if you go to a yellow planet, then you know that you're going to need money to actually explore that planet and get points for it. So the same goes with like the teal and the brown die and all that around the game.
I mean, this sounds really engine building-y, so I imagine you enjoyed it regardless, but is this something that people should be going after? Is this something people should be seeking?
I'm not positive at the moment. I've played it twice, and there is definitely some engine building going on here. In fact, one thing I haven't mentioned just yet is technology that you can build into your little tableau that lets you break and bend lots of different rules, which is fun. I really like doing those kind of things. But this is also... This is a hard game to really get into first.
Okay.
Like, I think once you know the game, once you played it 2 or 3 times, you're like, okay, cool, Solarius Mission, let's just smack this out. But the first game for us was a 4-player game, and it was over 3 hours. It was a long experience, like probably 3.5 hours for us, because it's kind of tough. Like, in this game, you're going to take 16 turns, and then the game's going to be over. And like you'll be on like turn 3, and you're gonna be like, how the heck am I gonna get anything done in this game? And at the end of the game, you will have gotten stuff done, but it's not one of those where you're like, oh my gosh, I did so much stuff. You're gonna end the game and be like, I did just barely enough stuff. And so you have all these really hard decisions about, is it worth it burning one of my precious turns to actually do this thing or do that thing, which makes it, I think, a little bit, not necessarily everybody's cup of tea.
That reminds me of Vineyards that we're just about to review on our channel, where you only have 12 actions in the entire course of the game. And it's not like the actions are like major things that do a lot of stuff. It's just, no, you do a thing and then a thing happens and then you move on, and you only have 12 of those. And somehow you have to build a wine-making empire out of that. So I guess Solarius Mission is along the same lines, but I'll tell you why I have a copy of Solarius Mission but haven't played it yet. And that's because the rulebook was very, very hard to penetrate. And I'm normally pretty good with rulebooks, but there are some rulebooks that just leave me I don't know, in a position where I don't feel like I can wrap my head around it. And I honestly have to say, I've tried with Solarius Mission, and I think I kind of get it, because there's some, material, as always, online to help you learn the game. But man, this one was especially hard for me for some reason.
I see where you're coming from. I had pretty much no problem with the rulebook for the first 2/3 to 3/4 of it. And then the last bit about outposts was so crazy. Like, I read it and I'm like, I think this is English, but I don't see how the words all interconnect. And like before that, it was kind of a hard rule book to get through, but like I sort of understood it. But then I got to that point and I felt like I was no longer processing words at all. And I had to go online, and it was just, I think that specifically the outpost section, this game has so many elegant aspects to it. And I know some people really don't like that word, but I do. And there's, with the dice, with the way the color matches the various actions that you're doing, it's a very tight system. And then you get to this outpost thing where you are trying to build these different outposts. Everybody has the same set that they can build out in front of them. And there's this crazy esoteric table chart thing you need to look at to see like when and where and how I'm able to actually build this thing. And there's like if then structures, like if this and this, but not that, then you could do this thing. And it's like, oh my goodness. And to a certain degree, it's good that they're in the game, but on the other, like they do good things. They give you really nice bonuses that let you do more stuff in these tiny amount of 16 turns. Like, you want to build these outposts, but the flip side is it's really hard to figure out how they work, especially hard to teach them once you sort of understand after reading up about it online. And thirdly, it's punishing because you can so easily screw up putting these outposts down and lose because of it. Because this is a game where the number of victory points you have at the end is actually relatively small. So gaining or losing 1 or 2 points has been a significant amount. Like, I've played it twice now, and I think the spread has been... the first time in the 4-player game, I think the spread between all 4 of us was like 4 or 5 points. In the second game, my friend Matt just blew me out of the water, but that's just because I did not do things very well. But it just means you really need to plan. And if you enjoy planning in games, then this one is going to be right up your alley. But you also have to fully understand how that planning works, because it's so easy to build an outpost in a not opportune way on like your second turn and not realize it until like your 10th turn and realize that you cannot win now. Because there's so many points, there's so few points in the game, and a significant portion of them can come from these outposts that you really need to pay attention to that. So this is certainly a game that you need to play at least a couple times before you feel comfortable with it. And I think to a certain extent, it's a game you need to play at least twice before you're probably going to enjoy it. Like, the first play I enjoyed, but it was tough and it was a bit of a slog because it was so long. The second game was 2 players and took us like an hour and 10 minutes, and I really enjoyed it, even though I lost hard. So I like the game, and I'm really looking forward to playing it again. Hopefully this next coming weekend. I'm looking forward to multiple more plays of this game. But it's dense, it's a little esoteric, it's not the easiest thing to get into, and it's also not the prettiest thing to look at. So it has some detractors going for it, unfortunately.
I quite like the art aesthetic, but it sounds like a game that really makes you persevere with its somewhat archaic rules and somewhat punishing structure. But if you are the sort of person you think you can persevere with that, you'll probably enjoy it. Am I along the right track here?
I think so. You will feel, when you do cool stuff, when you do, good combos, you feel that rush. You're like, oh, that was awesome. Like, you feel very satisfied about your plans coming to fruition. But on the flip side, you can also feel just as frustrated when you realize that you screwed something up and that you have no chance to win that one specific game, but maybe better luck next time.
Well, even with all these things, I still look at my copy and I still really want to play it. I just wish there was someone who could teach me and I wouldn't have to do it myself.
Well, maybe we'll get lucky and someone will port it online and then I'll just teach you.
Talking about port is made out of grapes, and grapes are harvested, and that leads us to a game called Key Harvest. that was well done, wasn't it? I really tried. So Key Harvest is quite an old game by this time, and it's one of the Key series games. If you're not familiar, the most popular one is probably Key Flower, the worker placement auction bidding game. So Key Harvest is also an auction game. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to acquire tiles and place them onto a very big tableau that each player has. And the tableau is kind of split up into columns and rows that are lettered and numbered. So you have A to F or even G, and you have 1 to 9. So there's a pretty big tableau of space of tiles that you can get. And the tiles, what do they do? Well, they give you resources that you can later use to bid for more tiles. The trick is there's only one copy of each tile in the entire game. So if you really want A7, well, you better get that A7. But here's the thing, right? So in Key Harvest, you will score points because points win you the game, and you'll score 1 point for each tile in your largest contiguous tile area, and you'll score 2 points for your second largest contiguous tile area. So you want to build basically 2 islands that are equally big and bigger than the other players' equally big islands of land that make resources. But what I really, really liked about Key Harvest is that you get to only take a tile until you bid for it yourself. So there's a row of tiles that you can choose from, and you can say, hey, I'll take that tile, but I can't have it because what I have to do is I have to put it up for auction. And only until an entire round has gone by and everyone's got a chance to bid on it if they wanted to. If no one's bid on it, hey, you can have it. And you get to set the price. So if someone bids for it, you get your money back that you've set the price for, and you get the other player's money as well. Whereas if you get to have it yourself, you just pay whatever you bid for it, and then you get to keep it. And that is largely the game. There's a little bit more complexity to it.
Is that sounds a lot like Isle of Skye?
It is very similar to Isle of Skye. It is slightly bigger in scope. And I have to say, I have enjoyed Key Harvest more than I enjoyed Isle of Skye.
Huh, yeah, that definitely sounds like some similarities with the tiling and that bidding structure. I mean, having it go around the table like that and you double down on your money on the price. I mean, I have not played Key Harvest, and I love Isle of Skye. I think I still have it rated as a 10 on Board Game Geek. I really love that game.
So here's the thing. We were really, really loving it. We played this with Elaine and Richard in Malta, and we really, really enjoyed our game up until about 2/3 of it. At which point, it became very clear that I was going to win, and there was nothing that people could do to stop me. And here's the reason why. The more tiles you acquire, the more tile options you have, because the larger your area is, the more tiles that come out are better for you. So it's kind of like a win-win situation. If you're starting to win, there's really nothing that pushes you back, and it's very hard for other players to catch up. At least that's something we noticed in our one play. What I really liked about it is that you're constantly looking for value, and that happens in many Euro games, but it felt like all the decisions were pretty tight, and oftentimes you wouldn't have tiles that were actually any good for anyone. And you have to value them because you want to take something, because if no one takes nothing, then someone's going to get a tile for very cheap, and eventually they'll just have more tiles than you. And even though they're not necessarily making sense right now, somewhere later down the line, they'll make a lot of sense for you, because again, your tiles will grow and you'll have more of them, and you'll be better than the other people who don't have tiles and they're not as good as you.
Once again, to bring it back to Isle of Skye, I mean, lots of people dislike the catch-up mechanism in that game, where as the game goes on, the people who are farther behind get more and more money to kind of jump back into it. And I never had a problem with it, and it almost sounds like maybe Key Harvest sort of needed something like that in there.
Yeah, the difference and the complexity from Key Harvest comes that in Isle of Skye, you just have money. And so it's, I guess, easy to fix it in Isle of Skye. Whereas in Key Harvest, you have about 5 different resources. So let's say that I have 2 apples and a barrel of hay, and I'm gonna take a tile and value it, and 1 apple and a barrel of hay. But the resources I have are hidden behind a screen and are secret, and other players can't see them. So, and I can't see what the other players have, but I can kind of maybe guess, based on what they've done in the game, that maybe none of the other players have any apples. So if I just value my tile at 1 apple, which is pretty cheap, right? I'm kind of hedging a bet and saying, you're not going to be able to pay for it. And if I'm lucky, I get a tile for very, very cheap. And that's interesting. And that's also a mechanism that is in Keyflower. It just comes out in different ways. But I really, really enjoyed just like bidding with things that may or may not be possessed by other players, and kind of assessing what they can do. And the other cool part and that's, I guess, the same in Isle of Skye, is that you have to watch the other players' boards and what is good for them. What is it that they're going to want? And I have to say that what Key Harvest does better than Isle of Skye is that sometimes it's kind of hard to evaluate what it is that another player actually wants. Whereas in Key Harvest, it's painfully obvious that, hey, that guy really needs G5, because if he gets G5, that's really good for him. So I must not allow that other person to have G5.
Do you worry about the memory aspect, though? You know, that's in Isle of Skye, you have just money, and that makes sense. I like when you mentioned that whole Apple example, my first reaction is that does sound cool. Like, you know, you could do a decision, and if you just bid one apple and then nobody else has apples, you're going to feel like, yeah, I did awesome. But the flip side is, what if you just don't have a great memory, or you weren't paying attention to one particular thing? That seems like remembering exactly what everybody has taken and then consumed is going to be a somewhat significant factor in doing well.
Oh god, it's impossible. Like, you would have to have like perfect memory to memorize what all players have, and sometimes you won't even know. But it comes down to that sort of gut feeling and instinct, and I don't know, I just kind of enjoy calling a shot and going, hey, I bet you don't have that. And if you're right, it's just tremendous.
That makes sense. I guess when a game has potential memory requirements, the way to get around it is to just throw way too many things at the players and then be like, well, only a savant will be able to pick up on all this. And I guess there are other games like that. So, I mean, I had never really heard of this game before you started talking about it, having played it in Malta. And I mean, I've heard of many of these key games, just a long series designed by the same guy. Who is the designer of this one?
Richard Breeze.
It is. I wanted to say that, and then I didn't want to sound like an idiot. Richard Breeze. And I haven't actually played any of his games. That's a lie. I played Key to the City London and did not like it that much. But either way, I haven't really heard of Key Harvest. I've heard of Cathedral. I've heard of Key Flower and many of these other key games. But considering how much I love Isle of Skye, it sounds like this one might actually be the one that I would like the most.
I think Keyflower is a pretty magnificent game, and honestly, I don't think Key to the City London even stands up close to it. If you have not enjoyed Key to the City, I would still recommend playing Keyflower, because it's still probably my favorite game of his. Elaine, however, enjoyed Key Harvest so much that she said she liked it more than Keyflower, because it is a little bit lighter, although not much, and it feels like a more accessible experience. The only problem, of course, as we mentioned, is that boy, does it feel miserable. Oh, and Richard's face when he realized, well, there's nothing I can do. And he just had to kind of sit through the motions. And every time I did something like, oh, I'm going to do this cool thing, I'm going to get this tile, and I'll combo off, and it'll give me that tile, and I'll have all these resources, and I'll do this thing. And I just watching his sad face was like, I understand what you're going through, but like, I also kind of want to do the best I can do. And that's what playing games is about for me. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not about winning or losing against an opponent. It's about seeing, hey, how well can I do in this game? And it's mostly, I guess, playing against yourself. And that's why I don't mind games that, play a little bit solitaire.
That makes sense.
This one definitely does not play solitaire, because you have to constantly engage with other players. And I found that really cool. I just wish that it didn't produce this miserable feeling, because one person, at least based on our game, will go away and lead, and there's not much you can do to catch up with them.
So, from a first impression, you have a strong feeling that Runaway Leader is something that will consistently happen? You don't think this is necessarily isolated to your one play?
Well, I guess the only other thing that I did that maybe put me in that position was that I was a little bit more lax with what tiles I was picking at the beginning of the game. I think the other players were focusing on tiles that were very adjacent to their other tiles, so that they get value, basically, because, why do you want tiles adjacent to your other tiles? Well, as I mentioned, you score points for large contiguous areas. But also, the way to get resources from your tiles is to take the harvest action, which means a contiguous area of unharvested tiles will be harvested, and all of them will produce resources. So if you have 5 tiles next to each other and take one harvest action, you'll get 5 resources. Whereas if you harvest a tile that's on its own, you'll only get 1 resource. So you're getting more resources with actions. As I mentioned, you're trying to get more value out of those actions that you're taking, because there's a limited amount of time to get everything done. So, I don't know. It just feels like I was a little bit more loose with that. And I guess in the end, I had more areas that benefited from tiles that were coming out than it was for other players. And maybe that was the right thing to do in the game. I'm not sure. But it feels still like it's inevitable that one person will pull away.
And I guess you just have to be okay with that. Well, I have to admit, I want to try this game. I've gone from knowing nothing about this one to it sounds pretty interesting. I don't know how much out of the way I'll go to like acquire a copy or anything, but I'll definitely, if I have the opportunity to, this is probably the key game that I'm most interested in trying because it's got some pretty cool stuff in there that I know I'm going to like right from the get-go.
Hey, before we wrap this up, we'd like to mention a thing. John, do you want to mention a thing?
Yeah, the thing is the Golden Geek Awards. Now, these happen once a year on BoardGameGeek.com, and they're awards for, the best two-player game and the best game of the year and all that, but there's also a best podcast category. And we are only 5 episodes in, of course, to our podcast, but we figured we'd mention this because it would be just super cool to get nominated for this. We know there's no way at all that we would win this, but
Nope.
you can nominate us, and you can nominate a bunch of other podcasts that you think are worthy of being in the running for winning this award, which is just a really cool thing to get. And but I don't know the specifics. So how do people do this?
Well, okay, so they need to, I guess they can Google Golden Geek Awards 2017 or 2016, but either way, we'll put a link in the description. And you obviously have to be a Board Game Geek user, and you also have to be a Board Game Geek supporter to be able to vote. If you are not, but still want to vote, you have to pay 20 Geek Gold. In case you don't have Geek Gold, you can always hit me up on Twitter at no pun included, and I'll donate you the 20 Geek Gold. And you don't necessarily even have to vote for us, but you can, obviously, and we really appreciate it because nominated would be such a big thing for our growing podcast. And if you're a listener, this is the way you can support us now. But also you can nominate a bunch of other podcasts and other things that you really enjoy, and you'll have a good time.
You can also hit me up on Twitter at John Gets Games. I will give you Geek Gold as well. I've got it coming out of my ears because I've been supporting the website for so many years. And also, as a content creator, every time we post something like a video, we actually get Geek Gold. So yeah, if you want any, just let me know, and I'll send it your way for this or really anything else because I don't need it.
And with that, we're going to conclude the 5th episode of Last Place. I have been Efka from No Pun Included. You can find my things at No Pun Included on YouTube or follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all kinds of things.
And you can find me at johngetsgames.com for my channel, for my channel and videos. But also, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. It's all John Gets Games, and I'd love to hear from you about any of this. And please, if you are watching this on YouTube, then comment down below or just send us email with any of these kind of things. Oh, we made an email address, Efka.
Yes, and people, if you have any kind of questions, you can email us at lastplacepodcast@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to go over those in the coming episodes.
It's true. Maybe you'll send a question and we'll answer it or something. We're not really sure, but either way, we'd love to hear back from you, and thanks again for listening.
Bye-bye.